When my aunt asked me to stay in her old house for a week, she gave me only one rule: don't open the attic. If I heard footsteps above me at night, she said to pretend I didn't. My Aunt Linda's house sat outside a small town in southern Missouri, about 15 minutes from the nearest gas station, and almost an hour from anything that could be called a city. It was one of those old white farmhouses that looked harmless in daylight and completely different after dark. The kind with a wide front porch, peeling paint around the windows, a gravel driveway, and a tree line behind it that seemed too close to the back of the house. She had lived there alone for as long as I could remember. When I was a kid, my parents took me there every summer for a few days. I remembered the smell of old carpet, canned peaches, wood polish, and the strange cold that always seemed to hang in the hallway, even in July. My aunt was never mean, but she had a quietness about her that made the house feel like a place where you were supposed to whisper. We were allowed in the kitchen, living room, downstairs bathroom, and guest room. We were not allowed upstairs unless she went with us, and we were never allowed near the attic hatch. It was in the upstairs hallway, just outside the second bedroom. A square wooden panel in the ceiling with a small brass ring hanging from it. When I was little, I asked her once what was up there. She smiled without showing her teeth and said, "Nothing that belongs to children." That was the kind of thing adults said when they didn't want to answer a question, so I forgot about it. Years later, after my aunt had a fall and moved into an assisted living facility, she called my mother and said she wanted to sell the house. My parents were busy, and I was home from college for the summer, so I agreed to drive down and spend a week cleaning the place out. It sounded simple enough. Pack old dishes, sort through furniture, throw away junk, maybe take pictures for the realtor. Before I left, my mother gave me the keys and a list of things to do. Then she hesitated. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "Your aunt wants me to tell you something." I laughed a little because I thought she was going to warn me about the plumbing or the stove. Instead, my mother said, "Don't open the attic." I looked at her, waiting for the rest of it. She didn't smile. She said if you hear anything up there at night, just ignore it. I asked if she was serious. My mother rubbed her forehead and said the house was old, and there were probably raccoons or squirrels in the roof. She said my aunt had always been strange about the attic, and it was easier not to argue with her. Then she added, almost like an afterthought, "Just don't go looking for problems." That should have bothered me more than it did. But I was 22, broke, and being paid by my parents to clean out an old house for a week. I told myself the attic probably had rotten flooring, exposed nails, insulation, animal nests, or old boxes my aunt didn't want me touching. I got there on a Monday afternoon. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch sagged a little on the left side, and tall weeds had grown up around the steps. Inside, everything was still and stale, like no one had opened a window in months. Sheets covered most of the furniture. Dust sat on the counters. The refrigerator was empty except for a box of baking soda and 3 unopened bottles of water. I started downstairs. I packed plates, cleaned out cabinets, took photos of furniture, and made a pile of things to donate. By evening, I was tired, sweaty, and covered in dust. I ordered a sandwich from the only place in town that delivered that far, ate it at the kitchen table, and tried not to think about how quiet the house became once the sun went down. Around 10, I went upstairs to the guest room. The upstairs hallway looked exactly how I remembered it. Narrow, low ceiling, old wallpaper with tiny blue flowers, and that attic hatch right in the middle, its brass ring hanging perfectly still. I stood under it for a moment, looking up. There was nothing frightening about it, just a square panel in the ceiling. Still, I closed the guest room door before I went to sleep. The first footsteps came at 1:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone as soon as I woke up. At first, I thought I had dreamed it. Then it came again. A slow creak above the ceiling. Then another. Then 3 soft steps crossing from one side of the room to the other. I lay in bed, staring up into the dark, trying to make sense of it. The sound was too heavy for a squirrel, too careful for a raccoon. It sounded like a person walking barefoot over old wood. The footsteps stopped directly above me. For almost a full minute, there was nothing. Then came one soft tap on the ceiling. Not loud, just enough to let me know that whatever was above me knew exactly where I was. I did what my aunt told me to do. I ignored it, or at least I pretended to. I rolled onto my side, pulled the blanket up to my neck, and lay perfectly still until morning. When sunlight finally came through the curtains, the whole thing felt less real. That is one of the strangest things about fear. In the dark, you are sure something impossible is happening. In daylight, you feel embarrassed for believing it. I went into the hallway and looked up at the attic hatch. It was closed, but there was a thin line of gray dust on the floor beneath it. Not scattered dust, not random dirt. A clean, narrow line, like something had fallen from the edges of the attic panel during the night. I took a picture and sent it to my mother. She replied 20 minutes later, "Old houses are dusty. Keep cleaning." I wanted to call my aunt, but my mother had told me she was tired and not adjusting well to the facility. I decided not to bother her. That day, I worked harder than I needed to. Part of me wanted to finish early and leave. I cleaned the downstairs closet, boxed up old magazines, and started sorting through the dining room. The house was full of things my aunt had never thrown away. Canning jars, expired medicine, church newsletters, stacks of newspapers tied with string, a drawer full of keys that didn't seem to fit anything. At the back of the kitchen pantry, I found something that stayed with me. A plastic grocery bag filled with receipts. Most of them were normal. Milk, bread, eggs, coffee, canned soup. But as I looked closer, I noticed the same items showing up again and again over the years. Peanut butter, crackers, canned peaches, bottled water, cheap socks, toothpaste. The quantities were strange. Not enough for a family. More than one elderly woman living alone would need. It felt like shopping for someone you didn't want a cashier to notice. I told myself I was reading too much into it. That night, I slept downstairs on the couch. At 1:17, the footsteps started again. This time, they were not above the guest room. They were above the living room. Slow steps crossing the ceiling, following me. I sat up and turned on the lamp. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, the house was completely silent. Then, directly above the couch, something dragged across the attic floor, long and slow, like furniture being moved. I grabbed my phone and called my mother. She did not answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I thought about leaving right then, but my car was outside in the dark, and the front porch light had burned out earlier that evening. The idea of walking across the yard with my back to that house somehow felt worse than staying inside it. So I sat awake until dawn with the lamp on. The next morning, something was waiting beneath the attic hatch. A spoon. One of the spoons I had packed in a box downstairs the day before. It had been placed in the center of the hallway, directly under the brass ring. I stared at it for a long time. Then I went downstairs, opened the box of silverware, and found the empty slot where it had been. That was when the fear changed. Footsteps could be animals. Dust could be old wood. Dragging sounds could be pipes, maybe. But a spoon taken from a sealed box downstairs and placed beneath the attic hatch was not an old house settling. Someone had been downstairs while I slept, or something from upstairs had come down. I called my mother again. This time she answered. I told her about the spoon, the footsteps, the receipts. I expected her to tell me to leave. Instead, she got quiet. Then she said, "Did you open the attic?" I said no. She said, "Then don't." I asked her what that meant. I asked her if someone was living up there. I asked her if Aunt Linda knew. My mother said, "Your aunt was alone for a long time. She got attached to routines." That was not an answer. I told her I was leaving. She said, "That might be best." Then, before hanging up, she said something that made my skin go cold. "Don't take anything that gets left under the hatch." I looked at the spoon on the floor. I asked her why. She said, "Just leave it where it is." Then the call ended. For the next hour, I packed like someone trying to escape a storm. Clothes, laptop, charger, wallet, keys. I didn't care about finishing the house. I didn't care about the money. I was done. But just as I was carrying my bag toward the stairs, I heard a sound above me. Not footsteps this time. A voice. It was faint, dry, and almost too soft to understand. "Linda?" I stopped on the staircase. The voice came again from behind the attic panel. "Linda, is that you?" It was an old man's voice. Thin, weak, patient. I stood there with one hand on the railing, unable to move. Every reasonable part of my mind told me to leave. But another part, the part that had grown up being told to help people, could not ignore an old man calling from a locked attic. I said, "Who's up there?" Silence. Then the attic panel shifted, just slightly. The brass ring trembled. I backed down the stairs. The voice whispered. She said you would come back. I left the house immediately. I drove 10 minutes down the road before I pulled over and called 911. I told them I was cleaning out my aunt's house and heard someone in the attic. I said there might be an elderly person trapped inside. I did not mention the spoon. I did not mention the footsteps following me. I just said someone was in the attic and needed help. 2 deputies met me at the house 40 minutes later. In daylight, with police there, the whole thing felt almost embarrassing. One deputy was older and quiet. The other was younger and clearly thought I was overreacting. I gave them the key. We went inside together. The spoon was still lying under the attic hatch. The older deputy noticed it but didn't say anything. He pulled down the attic ladder. The sound it made was awful. A long wooden groan, like something waking up. The younger deputy climbed first, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near his sidearm. He shined the light around and said there was a lot of insulation, boxes, and old junk. Then he stopped talking. The older deputy asked him what he saw. The younger one said, "There's a room up here." They both went up after that. I stayed in the hallway, staring at the open square in the ceiling. Warm, stale air drifted down from the attic. It smelled like dust, sweat, and something sour. After a minute, the older deputy called my name. I climbed the ladder even though every part of me did not want to. The attic was larger than I expected. Most of it was unfinished, with exposed beams, insulation, and old boxes stacked in uneven rows. But toward the back, behind hanging sheets of plastic, someone had built a small living space. There was a mattress on the floor, a lamp with an extension cord running through a hole in the wall, stacks of canned food, water bottles, folded clothes, a small battery-powered radio, and photographs, dozens of them. They were taped to the rafters, tucked into cracks, pinned to cardboard, and spread across a small wooden table. Most were of my aunt. Some showed her younger, standing on the porch, sitting in the kitchen, hanging laundry behind the house. Others were old family photos from our visits. Then I saw myself. A photo of me at 9 years old sitting at my aunt's kitchen table with a glass of lemonade. Another of me asleep on the living room couch during a summer visit. Another of me standing in the backyard, holding a stick like a sword. Those were not family photos. They had been taken from inside the house, through doorways, around corners, from upstairs windows. The younger deputy muttered something under his breath. The older one told me to go back downstairs. Before I did, I noticed one more thing on the small wooden table. A notebook. It was open to the last written page. The handwriting was shaky but careful. Linda is gone. Her sister's boy is here. He sleeps below me now. He looks like Thomas did when he was young. Maybe she finally sent him. I asked my mother later who Thomas was. At first, she said she didn't know. Then she cried. Thomas was my aunt's older brother, my mother's uncle. I had never heard his name before. According to my mother, he had been different. That was the word she used. Different. Back then, families hid things they didn't know how to explain. He had trouble speaking to people. He had episodes. He scared neighbors. He embarrassed my grandparents. When my aunt was young, Thomas disappeared. That was the official family story. He ran away. No body was found. No funeral. No discussion. But my mother admitted there had always been whispers that he never really left the house. That my grandparents had kept him hidden for years. That after they died, my aunt stayed in the house because she was the only one who knew how to care for him. I asked if she thought Thomas had still been alive up there. She said no, too quickly. The deputies found no one in the attic. No old man. No intruder. No body. But they did find fresh food wrappers, fresh footprints in the dust, a narrow path through the insulation that led to a vent above the guest room. They also found a second opening hidden behind a loose panel in the upstairs closet. It led down into the wall cavity and out behind a cabinet in the kitchen. Whoever had been living up there could move through the house without using the attic ladder. My aunt refused to talk about it. When my mother asked her about Thomas, she became so upset the nurses had to calm her down. The only thing she said was, he was never supposed to be alone. The house never sold. My parents had it boarded up and listed the land as is. I never went back inside. A cleanup crew removed most of the furniture, but they refused to clear the attic after one of them claimed he heard someone whispering behind the plastic sheets. A few months later, my aunt died in her sleep. After the funeral, my mother gave me a small envelope. She said it had been found in my aunt's nightstand at the facility. My name was written on the front. Inside was a key and a folded note. The key was old, brass, and tied to a piece of string. The note was in my aunt's handwriting. I'm sorry. I thought he would stay with the house. Don't answer if he calls you by my name. I threw the key into a river on the drive home. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. Then, 3 weeks later, I woke up in my apartment at exactly 1:17 in the morning. There were footsteps above my ceiling. I live on the top floor.